I think it's more likely we end up in the Hunger Games. When you have a whole society based around labour and work as an essential part of your existence, take them both away, people are going to be very adrift, I think.
There is a foundational law of energy in physics, and it says that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be transformed.
We didn't create the energy reserves, they were just here. We discovered them, we worked out we could actually exploit them, but we didn't create them.
If we are on a finite planet and we're digging it up and taking all of this stuff from it, how did we build the systems that depend on this myth of, does it ever feel like that the world is increasingly accelerating? Politically, economically, technologically, and somehow our bodies are struggling to keep up. I'm Nivi Jaswal Wirtjes, filmmaker, researcher, and founder of Divinity and the Versa Foundation, in conversation with renowned economist, Professor Steve Keen. These short conversations build on the themes explored in my documentary feature, Third Degree Burnout, A Survivor's Guide, as we explore how economics, food systems, human health, and planetary systems are all interconnected. Welcome to Connecting the Dots, why the economy is burning us out and what we've been missing. Here's a question that sounds simple, but rarely gets asked in economics. Can an economy grow forever on a finite planet? In this episode, Steve and I explore one of the biggest blind spots in mainstream economic thinking: the role of energy, ecology, and the physical limits that shape every economic system. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Steve, to this.
Holy moly. This is quite interesting because now she asked, can we expand forever in a finite planet? Well, that's very interesting because when we look at things from a quantum physics point of view, then it's no longer finite. So once we understand, the human understands how to live in a symbiotic relationship in harmony with the planet and the universe, then finite is no longer a limitation. Or is it? That's for you to figure out.
Amazing new episode that we have for our viewers, and this time we're talking about energy as a blind spot. Why economists pretend that the planet doesn't exist. So in a moment, over this conversation, we will be making that connection between energy and planet. What does energy have to do with planet, and burnout? This episode explores a foundational truth, but often ignored truth, that the economy is not just a financial system, it is an energy system. And we examine together with Steve in this conversation what energy actually is, why infinite growth might actually end up violating some physical laws, and it's potentially not possible on a finite planet, why energy quality matters, especially in food systems and how we organize that aspect of our lives on the planet, and how AI might be introducing a new kind of an energy paradox that we know very little about at this point in time. So we'll get into that a little bit as well with Steve. The goal overall is for us to connect the dots between physics, economics, food systems, and human and planetary burnout. We often talk about money, labor, and capital as the building blocks of the economy. But underneath all of that is something far more fundamental: energy. Because without energy, labor cannot function, machines cannot run, and we won't survive. So before we even get into economics, maybe we need to ask a more basic question. What is energy and what types of energy actually sustain life and economies? So Steve, from an economist's lens and an economist who also understands physics, how should we properly define energy when we talk about economies and not just ecosystems?
Well, it applies to both ecosystems and the economy as well, and that is that it's not the quantity of energy that matters; it's the quality. And what we're spinning around a giant nuclear fusion reactor that is pumping out lots of rays in terms of visible light and ultraviolet light. Well, they come as photons. We now know that energy comes in little packets called photons, and the energy that comes from the sun is high intensity. So we get extremely high quality energy from the sun that enables animals and humans and economies as well to take that high quality energy, turn it into useful work, and have a waste level of low quality energy. And then the overall balance of the planet, when it is in balance, it's not in balance right now, is that the energy going out is equivalent to the energy coming in, but the energy coming in is extremely high frequency, low entropy, as it's called by physicists, low disorder. And what goes out is much lower energy but high disorder particles. So we all rely upon that. Without there to be no life whatsoever. The sun is absolutely critical.
Yes, absolutely. And just to put it in layman terms, because you're talking about high frequency, high intensity, high entropy, um, the really like how I'm thinking about this is that our Earth is a living system. It's
Yeah,
receiving
yeah.
this high energy, highly intense energy from our sun, in our galaxy, the solar system, and then it when it metabolizes that energy, passing through the atmosphere, being taken up by all the living beings, including human beings and other biodiversity, flora and fauna. Once we've metabolized it, the result, the metabolites or the outcomes are more diffused, and they're a lower, quality, in nature. Um, and we actually strip it down to survival, Steve, biologically and economically. What are the top forms of energy humans fundamentally depend on, you think? And how do those map onto, food, fuel?
They're like an advanced animal. We weren't a civilization. When we got to the civilization stage, we started, first of all, using energy from animals. So animal husbandry means that rather than having a human trying to plow a field, you have a human who directs a horse or a draft animal to plow the field, and you go from the human's capacity to put energy in, which is about the same as an old electric light bulb. If you remember the old incandescent light bulbs, they used about 100 watts of energy. That's about the maximum that a human can put out for any length of time to do things like plow a field. But the draft animals, they're 1 horsepower. That's about 1,000 watts, so about 10 times the energy output we can get. So then we're using animal husbandry. That all began to change in the 1700s when we realized, well, it's actually early, it goes back to about the 1500s, we started realizing we could use various forms of energy that we didn't understand where they came from. Things like peat, for example. So I live in Amsterdam, and one of the reasons Amsterdam exists is because people would clear swampland and take peat out, and the peat was then used as an energy source. This is part of the
Gods.
industrialization of the Dutch Empire, and then they then fill in and say, why don't you build your house inside these dikes? And that's how Amsterdam came into being. So that was the first major use of fossil fuels, not fossil fuels in that case, that was decayed plant matter. But when I think it was Newcomen who invented the first steam engine, and that was extremely inefficient, but it meant you could use coal power to take the water out of coal mines and then enable more coal to be retrieved. And then the big change came with James Watt in the 1770s when he realized he could make the steam engine far more efficient by separating out where the condensation occurred. And that was the real beginning. So now, rather than just using human slaves or animal slaves, we're now using fossil fuel slaves. And that's when the huge increase in the standard of living of people began to occur, because rather than being limited to exploiting other humans or exploiting animals, we're now exporting fossilized energy, which has been in the planet for hundreds of millions of years in some cases. And we then take out the solar energy absorbed by plants and animals literally 100 million years ago, and then we're intensely releasing that now. We used to have our first major form of coal-fired power was the railways. Transportation with railways, and now we've got transportation with rockets.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what's actually happened is a huge increase in the energy throughput of each of those machines over time.
Right. Well, thank you so much once again, for sharing with us this historical context. And one of the things that actually stood out for me is how exploitation and enslavement was fundamental to some of these early societies, to be able to harness energy beyond just the human energy. And then you mentioned enslaved materials, and if we were to actually offer that status of a living being to earth because it sustains life.
Exploit them. We didn't create them. This is absolutely critical, because it means the economy depends upon exploiting elements of the nature that were not created by the economy itself. We have to exploit nature, and that should be built into how economists think about production, but they've completely forgotten it. It was something which turned up in the early economists, the physiocrats in particular, in the 1700s. But a classical school of thought lost it. The neoclassical school of thought lost it. And they these days try to model production as if you can produce just by combining labor and capital. And that's where I came up with that saying, labor without energy is a corpse, capital without energy is a sculpture. So you can't get these things done unless you feed energy in. So, and that's relying upon the natural environment. So in that sense, yeah, we have to be exploiting nature to be able to have our civilization.
Right. And thank you for reiterating that. That's such an important point, because the body um, is the most honest energy accounting system, and the earth, and all its energy reserves in the form of all of these different elements and materials is again an honest energy accounting system. But if we're not accounting for it and we're just building our economic thought and our ideas and things without taking into account that this energy already exists, it's an external factor that's an input factor into how we think about economics and economies and how economic growth is possible really on Earth, we're not being honest. When we don't account for energy as an external factor, as an input factor, we start to build mythology around how we think about economics. That mythology then is not attuned with how really human systems, human energy systems, and elemental earth, a small bag of chips, right? Or a hamburger, but the energy output is not of a biological, good quality. It's not of biological value. And it's almost as though the body is rejecting this economic logic and the meta crisis that we're now living inside of. And it's not just our bodies and mental health that is feeling it. It sounds as though the earth is rejecting it as well, the way we're thinking about economic growth. And that obviously is then demonstrated in the form of climate change. Um, let's get on to the next topic that I really want us to discuss, Steve. There is a foundational law of energy in physics, and it says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. So if we have all of these energy systems that are locked up into the earth, and we're now discovering it one element after the other. We started with discovering the peat bogs and then fossil fuels and so on. It raises a pretty uncomfortable question. If we are on a finite planet and we're digging it up and taking all of this stuff from it, it has finite energy flows. How did we build the systems that depend on this myth of perpetual growth? And more importantly, is that even physically possible? So, to really, the question for you is, do mainstream economic models implicitly assume infinite energy availability? And if they do, then where does that assumption break down when we bring in thermodynamics?
Well, they don't even include energy in their model. This is the ridiculous thing. So the model that dominates mainstream economics is called the Cobb-Douglas production function. And what that has is it says you have technology, which they call total factor productivity, multiplied by labor, multiplied by capital, where they're both raised to an exponent that represents the proportion of income that goes to those two social classes. And as it happens, the people who first dreamt up this model, the Cobb and Douglas back in 1928, they both actually said at one point we should include energy in future advances, but that was forgotten, which completely trivializes it. So the reality is, and this is what I find with the empirical data, it's 1 for 1. If you have energy increases by 5%, GDP rises by 5%. If GDP falls by 6%, energy consumption falls by 6%. So there's absolutely a lock-stock relationship between the two, which the mainstream economists completely ignore.
Wow, I mean, as a layperson, as somebody who is not trained in economics, as you are,
GDP, their conclusion was that a 10% fall in energy would reduce GDP by 0.4%. And they said if production is insensitive to energy as expected.
it sounds as though when growth hits real physical limits and what actually adjusts in the form of technology, consumption, or population, even burnout, like all of these other factors that neoclassical economists are not taking into fact, that ultimately, if we keep going on with this treadmill, it will default to a dystopian outcome, because ultimately the energy input is going to run out. We're going to run out of some of these, sources of energy, or on structural burnout at scale and energy burnout at scale is so alarming, and your model actually shows that should the energy start depleting, that it is going to have a deflationary impact on our GDP and our possibilities of growth. Let me actually ask you a different question now. A lot of the times the word energy is just thrown at us either through media vocabulary or through economics vocabulary as described by the neoclassical economists, as though all calories are equal, all barrels of oil are equal, right? And we know that not to be true, that energy, even within the same category, for instance, of oil, it is not homogeneous.
I've actually once made the mistake of putting diesel in a petrol car.
Oh my
I don't
goodness.
recommend it. Okay, yeah. Just didn't notice the right pump, and somehow it fitted inside my old car's petrol lid, and bang, the car made 100 meters and then it stalled. So if you run out of petrol, you can't substitute diesel and vice versa. And that's something about the diversity and the heterogeneity of products in a capitalist economy. And that's the rule. Everything is different to everything else.
Yes.
So there is no such thing as a homogeneous product. But economic theory works in terms of homogeneous products. And they say, let's make an assumption that all cars are the same. Okay? Let's make an assumption that all pieces of clothing. Literally, they're doing that. And once you do it, then you get trapped in their mental framework. But of course, it's not true. The diversity is the thing which is most obvious about products. And equally, we need a diversity of energy sources. And if you run out of one, you cannot substitute another. And not being aware of that is why we're having such a horrific time right now with the Iran war, and equally with global warming, because we are exhausting the oil supplies on the planet. Coal's got a lot longer to go, but oil's being exhausted. And we're also dumping this waste into the environment.
Right.
So all these things are huge constraints, and mainstream economics, again, ignores them.
Right. And what I also heard about was the El Nino super event that we can all, expect in 2026, where global
Yeah.
temperatures are going to see a sharp increase. And this super event obviously then is going to have an impact on our agricultural systems. We'll see
Yep.
crop failures. And if there isn't enough, energy, for instance, transportation that's, not available, then either you'll see production and whatever that production is sitting in one place and rotting and not being able to taken from point A to point B in a timely manner, and the possibility of droughts and famines in other parts of the world. um, you're absolutely right. Energy is incredibly diverse. We have to recognize that. We have to take that into accounting when we're thinking about the economic systems. And in biological systems, that diversity is mandatory. It's not optional. And
Yeah,
it's
we
not
need
usually.
diversity. You don't have life without a diversity of life.
What parallels, Steve, do you see between energy diversity in ecosystems and diversity in human food systems? Since a lot of my work is around food choices, food systems, and what happens when we oversimplify either.
Yeah.
Love
Oh,
to
we've
hear
had some
thoughts.
horrific experience. Like people would know about the Irish potato famine. Uh, the reason that was disastrous, apart from the English completely mismanaging it and forcing Ireland to export food when it was people were undergoing a famine, it was also because one particular type of potato was planted in the Ireland, and that became the sole source of the crop. Whereas in France, there's at least 10 or 15 different types of potatoes that existed in France.
Desire to control over other parts of the world leads to a completely dystopian outcome for different peoples, right? And in this case, the example that you're giving us is that of the Irish. Um, we explore this, through our film as well. We have several burnout stories that people, share when it comes to just dependency on few food groups or just certain types of food products. How you can be completely overfed in calories that you're picking up at the drive-through.
Life balance, life family balance that's harmonious, you're in a state of where your sympathetic, parasympathetic, and endocrinal gland systems are being stressed, and constantly being stressed like that creates incoherence on a cellular level. And that's where you have to understand on a cellular level, you need confluence, coherence, harmony, and balance, and all those factors in the proper proportion. Back to the video.
And make a lot of money for themselves, but not definitely or truly heal. And that mismatch mirrors what seems to be happening in the broader economy. I'd love for us to share the survivorship story of a chef. Her name is Sahar Ahmed. She's a chef and a restaurateur in Boston, and she has a very inspiring and moving story of healing her pulmonary sarcoidosis. So let's have a watch.
At the time that I got sick, I was moving from one country to the other. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis, which affected my lungs. I was put for over a year on extremely high doses of prednisone, which is a steroid, which, yes, helped with the breathing tremendously. So I was breathing very well, but I could not tolerate what other effects it had on my body. I wasn't sleeping. I gained 50 pounds. My mood was actually worse, not better. And I was always feeling like I was rushing because it does give this false sense of energy, and then you crash. I found there were so many people whose symptoms got better when they adopted a plant-based lifestyle. So I
Be of biological value or even economic value in the longer run. Also, modern food systems and modern energy systems, they tend to be very carbon intensive, high input, with a lot of the times low biological return, with an overemphasis on some food groups than the others. For instance, protein seems to be having a moment at this point in time. And when we think about that, then inevitably we start talking about factory farms and how carbon intensive they are, how water intensive they are, and at the same time, they're the biggest producers of methane.
Yeah, an interesting thing is there was a guy by the name of Rudolf Steiner. He's well known back in the 1920s. And he said big agriculture is going to create a problem with these organically modified vegetables. And one of the things that he was into was a naturopath for the soil. And that's at a time where you had the end of the era of wood stoves, and therefore you take the ash from the wood stove and spread it on the land without realizing how that regenerates and resuscitates the soil. And that's a very important factor that gets lost, and people don't understand that symbiotic relationship and how we've abused the privilege because we just take, and do not understand, like the indigenous people, there is a symbiotic.
That we're entering a moment where AI is being positioned as a solution, as a panacea to many of humanity's problems and capitalism's problems of efficiency, productivity, even reducing human labor strain. But at the same time, AI is massively energy intensive. AI is also unpredictable. The impact that it's having on, the current generation's ability to get employed, because there are these predictions everywhere around how it's going to wipe out, a large chunk of white collar work. So it raises a paradox, Steve. Are we solving one constraint while accelerating another? And that raises a pretty important point on from an economic standpoint. First of all, are economists thinking about AI at all?
Labor for anything apart from designing machines in the very labor for anything apart from designing machines in the very first instance. So the jobs that have existed for people who just are doing process work, very repetitive manual labor, those jobs can disappear. And it isn't just that area, it's also hitting computer programming. It isn't just that area, it's also hitting computer programming. So what was seen as a growth area for people for some time, skill up and learn how to program, you'll have a job. Now, if that looks like something which AI is going to undermine. So it's quite remarkable. What it can do. And I'm not knocking the power of AI.
The right question. So even with AI, which is the right question. So even with AI, which is a language learning module, and then they advance it with tokens, where they take a factor of 3 different words and create potentialities and probabilities. But the reality is all the information is it's a database built. Depending on the framework and how they parse the data, it'll sort a certain way. So depending on what your intention is for an outcome, it's without consciousness. So it's just going to without consciousness. So it's just going to base its output on the framework and the parsing and the coding of what's given to it. There could be so we have no understanding of how we're going to deal with it. So some guy said, this guy Elon Musk, he's in a interview with a lady at The Economist, and he says, well, everybody is going to be wealthy. He can't explain how, but yet he can smirk and say USAID, and cutting that, nobody got hurt by it, because Gates Foundation or another foundation could take up the slack, but no planning to take up that slack. So obviously people fall through the cracks and they do die from it. But these guys just don't care because they're playing the game And it's all about money. And once you understand that
It has to give people an income to stay alive. And it has to give people an income to stay alive. And the thing is, how easily can our societies move from the current situation in which you only get paid if you have a job to something more realistic, where when AI comes in, we get paid because the system itself is productive and we sit back as humans and watch the machines do all the work and produce the goods and services. How do we provide an income to people who don't actually own those machines? And that's the real dilemma. And I think this is something which particularly American societies, and I think this is something which particularly American society is extremely poorly equipped to handle that. Because how do you go from insisting people must have a job to get an income to saying, oh, we're going to give you an income where we create the money for you by the state? Now, that's a huge ideological leap for America.
to think if you have to have a purpose, you need a purpose, or you're going to seek a spiritual path. And without the whole time understanding, why do you spend your whole life searching when you're already there? Let go of the masks. Go back to just to your true self. You've created this avatar, which is a construct which has been created for you just after you left the womb, because belief systems are created. People are telling you what you can do, what you can't do. You go to school, learn how to think, what to think. And the fact of the matter is, who are you? You don't even know who you are. You seek outside yourself for satisfaction, yet you do not know who you are. You've never looked within in order to see the outside. And that's the most important thing. So you don't need a purpose. You don't need to seek a spiritual path. Certain people think enlightenment will change their way. Enlightenment is just awareness, various levels of awareness. Like, get grounded, start by being kind to yourself, and life will change. Back to the video.
For the average person, the average, John Doe, on the street, or Jane Doe on the street is essentially, I get up, I go to work. And
Yeah.
and that's how I, sustain myself. That's how I spend my time. My social networking, my professional networking sometimes overlaps. And it's work is a source of community for me. And now when we're thinking about this really interesting and dare I say a future with amazing agentic profile and potential,
Mm.
where that human agency is taken away, where part of our human purpose, and how we structure our day, and how we've been like as a species, it sounds like since forever, when it's taken away, that could be a source of burnout for people, right?
Yeah, but another way of looking at it, and depending how you respond to it, it could actually be a rebirthing. It's how you look at it. It's how you do it. And that's why I just get back to, well, people, if you're not kind to yourself, how are you going to be kind to your family or anything that you touch upon? So once you make that change naturally evolves from within to the out. From within to the universe. And that's from above, so below. Same thing, from within to the universe. From above, and so it is below, etc., etc.
It's kind of paradoxical around burnout too, right? Where it's like you're overworked and you feel burnt out. And if you don't have work at all and you're just sitting twiddling thumbs and an empty mind is a devil's workshop, like all of those things come to mind, that could in and of itself be another source of anxiety for a lot of
I think it is. I mean, it's a huge anxiety. People who are losing their jobs right now through AI are clearly anxious for damn good reasons. So the loss of jobs itself is going to be a huge cause of anxiety for many, many people. But then if you get to the other stage and you say, well, how do we keep people alive?
But before we get to that stage, we have to understand that we have created, just through our ignorance, we have created a problem of affordability so that people cannot live like people. We treat people like animals instead of like human beings. We treat our family and people without dignity, without respect, without understanding how precious a life is. Just one life. One life is priceless. So pain and suffering, or benevolence, harmony, empathy, and abundance. It's a very simple process.
Give everybody a basic income created where the money is created by the state, and then they buy goods and services off the billionaires who own the machines and own the retail outlets. That sort of works, but as you say, you suddenly have your sense of meaning ripped away from you because part of your meaning was the work you did and the people you did the work with. Suddenly that's gone. They're not there anymore.
Yeah, but that's something that creates anxiety because of this construct you created. You created an attachment. And from that attachment, you create outcomes. And if those outcomes aren't realized, it shatters the whole construct. And so, what do I mean by that? So let's look at a very simple process like love and unconditional love. People seek relationships. They want to love somebody. They get together and they love somebody. But is it true love? Because once you create attachments to things, to outcomes, it's no longer unconditional. And if those attachments and outcomes are not realized, the whole construct of what you thought it was falls apart. And that's where attachments and outcomes, understanding pain and suffering comes from the mind. You create that.
The hell do you do? When you have a whole society based around labor as a critical part of your behavior and work as an essential part of your existence, take them both away. People are going to be very adrift, I think. And the only way to cope with it in the long run, if we ever get to the long run, would be to reorganize society so we ended up in those same sort of size communities, interact intensely with people again, and that would improve our lives immensely in that sense.
Exactly.
But it has to happen, and I think it's more likely we end up in the Hunger Games.
Well, I have a slightly more optimistic view than that, Steve, and we do explore that in my documentary film. We talk about the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. And in addition to, making the right food choices, working out,
Yeah.
stress management, not or modulating use of addictive substances or so on, one of the most critical pillars is using the need for connection and community as medicine. So there are lots and lots of emergent initiatives at this point in time within the lifestyle medicine community that are focusing on food as medicine. They're also focusing on community as medicine. And I it's my hope, that when we as we navigate, our species' future with what's happening on planet Earth, with all the meta crises that we're surrounded by, and this agentic AI-based future that
So it's not really managing this species. It's actually managing this experience. Don't get caught up on the species. The species end of things will unfold in the natural order of all things. So you can keep playing the game, or you can start living life, enjoying life the way you were meant to. Because it's about living life. You only live in the present. Yesterday is not here. Tomorrow is not here. You only live today. And every moment that you awaken, you are only in the present. So you can live in the present. Your actions in the present will create probability. Accept the fact that the present is the past, present, and future. Then you get, once you understand living in the present, takes you out of worrying about the future, worrying about the past you can't change. That creates anxiety, that creates an imbalance of the body, that creates incoherence on a cellular level. Then you start reaching for medications that are not in coherence with your natural body rhythms. Then you understand that you create what you're trying to avoid, that you created. And then you get caught in that spin, rinse, repeat cycle. And unless you detach, witness the patterns, don't become the patterns, and just rest in what sees, and then you can be in a position of knowing versus playing the game. And that's as best a way that I can present it to you at this moment in space-time.
That we're all hurtling towards, whether we like it or not, it's happening, it's unfolding before our eyes. Are there small fires that we can light in our own communities to create that cushion against the devastating impacts that this may have on us, and even increase isolation that is already happening, loneliness that is already happening in epidemic forms in modern society? We've talked about the community impact and the human impact of AI, and this existential limbo that it might leave us in. Um, Again, since this episode is so focused on energy, I want us to talk about the energy consumption of AI.
Mm.
What's the profile of that like?
Well, it's huge. And the reason is that what AI really amounts to is massive amounts of mathematics being done in dedicated banks of computers using huge arrays of numbers. So you need to have massive computer banks, lots of graphical processors, and the energy consumption is just totally off the scale. So I've got a feeling that we're going to find AI being restricted, mainly because it's just too expensive. Most of the AI companies are losing money because they're paying more for the energy than they are for getting from selling the output of the AIs that generate those results using energy consumption. So we're likely to see AI becoming more restricted and more expensive. And then the real question is that can we continue expanding AI when we have the limitations on energy that we
A life without ChatGPT, right? A life without ChatGPT, right? Because that's like the democratization of AI and its potential has happened so quickly within the last 5 years. Has happened so quickly within the last 5 years that to imagine suddenly that being taken away from our students and from our teachers and from people in general. So I pulled up some neat and very dire data on the energy footprint of ChatGPT, just
yeah.
to share with our viewers.
that mind, yeah.
Daily energy consumption, responsible renewable energy. And then water footprint with 2.5 billion daily queries made to ChatGPT. The total daily water usage alone is approximately 1,000
Yeah.
gallons.
I think this is potentially a reason that AI will be constricted in the future because we can't afford the energy that's involved in it. So again, energy is critical. Without energy, there is no AI.
Thank you so much, Steve, for this amazing, yet another enlightening, informative conversation. So maybe the real blind spot isn't just that economics forgot about energy. It's that we've built systems that behave as if limits of human beings and limits of the planet just don't exist.
And they do.
And they do, absolutely. While our bodies, ecosystems, and even our technologies are telling us otherwise.
Yeah.
Because energy isn't abstract. It's the food we eat, the fuel we burn, the attention we spend, the exhaustion we feel. And when we ignore the true cost of energy, something eventually breaks.
Boy, I did a whole little speech there and nothing came through. So, questions, comments, throw in the comments section, and love and peace.